Insight series is a monthly online event where we invite speakers with a connection to interdisciplinarity to share their thinking and expertise on a particular topic with our research and research professional community. Truzaar will present for roughly 20-30 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. If you can please keep your microphones muted until that point, and then when we get to the Q&A, I'll invite you to raise your virtual hand and put your question in the chat. These sessions work really well when we have a good level of engagement and participation from our audience. So I'd really encourage you to make a note of questions as you listen to Truzaar and get ready to ask them when I invite you to do so. We'll record Truzaar's presentation, but we'll stop the recording for the Q&A section. So I'm about ready to hand over to Truzaar, but before I do, let me introduce them. Dr. Truzaar Dordi is a lecturer in sustainability management at the University of York. Truzaar's work sits at the intersection of sustainability transitions, financial stability, and the leadership capacities required to drive systemic change. Truzaar leads a graduate module on change management for sustainability. He also serves as the Director of Partnerships and Engagement for the Department of Environment and Geography. Today, Truzaar will draw on the Three Horizons framework and explore what it means to become a changemaker, someone who can bridge the gap between abstract potential and concrete impact. So we're delighted to be joined by Truzaar today. I'll hand over to you now. Thank you, Truzaar.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Lauren. That brief summarized it perfectly. So my name is Truzaar Dordi. I am a lecturer here at the University of York, where I study the space of sustainability transitions. And specifically what I'm really interested in is what stalls sustainability transitions. There are many things that stall sustainability transitions: power, consolidation, politics, finance, narratives, capitalism. But I think one thing that's less discussed, but I think most actionable in the space that we're working in, is on leadership. How can we be better leaders, especially during points of significant turmoil? So the talk today is going to be a bit of a two-parter. First, on how we can start thinking about building agency during uncertain times, control over the future that seems so uncontrollable these days. And second, what I think very much is needed from a leader these days in order to actually drive meaningful change. And I'm going to start with where we are now, our education system. From elementary school to university, the message is always the same. Understand things deeply, communicate them clearly, get the right qualifications, build the right expertise, present your case, and the world will respond. In many ways, this largely does work. I've fortunately been able to build an entire career on saying what I think. But whether you are working in research or politics, coaching, industry, community, we're told to be thought leaders, to provide context, interpretation, clarity, guidance. And in many ways, I think that has also been, at least in my opinion, one of the most consequential issues we face. And we can start with climate communications, for example, right? We have the context, we have the clarity. The assumption is that if we just provide enough evidence, another scenario, another devastating report, people will certainly act. People will undoubtedly follow. And that's far from the case, not just in climate, but every domain where complex systems resist change: health, policy, organizational strategy, supply chains, certainly education. And so the question I want to sit with today is, what if the gap isn't actually what we know, but our capacity to act on it? What happens when better information isn't leading to better decisions and better outcomes? So I want to make the case that in this world saturated with insight today, more than ever with AI and so on, people are no longer looking for the smartest take. They're looking for people that make change happen, make things happen. And for many of us, I think the issue isn't a lack of what that future could be, what that vision is, but of execution. Research that we cite but never implement, strategies announced with fanfare, but not translated to daily actions. We nod, we agree, and then we carry on. And that's because understanding and execution are two different things. And so for those of us who work across sectors, which I imagine would be describing many of us on the call, we expect to facilitate collaboration across boundaries. We expect to navigate ambiguity without formal guidance and authority. We're expected to deliver impact beyond our domains. But do we have the practice, the capacity, not just to show up intellectually, but how we show up, how we sustain ourselves, and how we navigate resistance? So that's the territory I want to explore through a framework that offers what I think is something genuinely useful, not only as an analytical tool, but as a way of developing ourselves as leaders. And it may be a framework a few of you have come across before, the three horizons. It's a really simple way of envisioning change in an uncertain future. And what's particularly unique about this framework is that it's not only about making sense in an otherwise uncertain and complex time, but it's critically about building agency, building a sense of directionality and control for transformation. So we'll talk a little bit about what this means in terms of mindful navigation. And really is as simple as this. There are three curves over time, capturing the challenges of the present, the changing reality, what those challenges are, imagining the world that we want to create collectively, and then this space of, okay, what do we need to do to help us achieve our desired future? And so for those of you who haven't come across the Three Horizons framework, I'll spend just a little bit of time speaking about this before talking more so about the leadership side of things, starting with Horizon 1. And Horizon 1 is the world as it currently operates, right? This is our dominant institutions, our assumptions, our incentive structures, our ways of working. And H1 isn't bad in this story. It holds a whole lot that is worth conserving. The knowledge, the relationships, the infrastructure, the institutional wisdom. But the insight here is that we've built these systems over a period of deep stability. And we're now expecting them to function the same in this period of tumultuousness. We've built systems built for stability in a world that no longer offers that. So our existing structures are increasingly losing its fit for purpose, and consequently, the structures that got us here, our policies, our priorities, aren't designed to get us to where we need to go into the future. We turn next to Horizon 3 all the way at the end, and Horizon 3 is the future that is trying to emerge. And what I particularly love about this space is that this isn't a forecast. This isn't what we're trying to predict about what the future may look like, but a vision of what we want, something that we actively want to create. This is where our deepest values live. The reason we got into the work we do in the first place, the world we want to inherit. And the beauty of this is that Horizon 3 exists today in fragments, small pieces, in pilot projects, and exceptional teams that you may see in moments where everything just works the way it should. And this all exists in the present tense. While it exists, in the present tense, it yet hasn't made it as the dominant pattern, the main piece that we're seeing. And so at this stage between Horizon 1, the challenges, and Horizon 3, the vision, I often encourage people to think about this in the context of their own lives, right? We all have a vision of what we want for ourselves. We want to, perhaps be more active. We want to spend more time with family. We want to sleep more, whatever it is. And so what dominant ways of being need to change to allow for that to emerge? Is it fewer late nights on our phones, less time in front of the TV? What are the challenges that sort of stop us from achieving this future vision that we have for ourselves? And equally, how do we build the agency? How do we build that sense of control to make that change? And that's where Horizon 2 comes in. This is the transition space where our challenges now impede us from our vision or potential. But the alternative, this Horizon 3, hasn't yet fully proven itself. And in fact, this is where we spend most of our working lives, where we strategize, we prioritize, we experiment, we say we'll wake up earlier, we'll commit to that 10K run. And this is where change happens, or not, right? This is where equally competing interests collide. This is where we see massive systemic inertia, and ultimately, more often than not, where change stalls, where change is co-opted by our established Horizon 1 ways of being. And finally, I like to use this sort of idea of a butterfly as an analogy when thinking about the three horizons, primarily treating Horizon 2 as a chrysalis, right? A protected space for transformation to occur. And what comes out of that chrysalis isn't a faster, fitter, fatter caterpillar, but something new entirely, a butterfly. Change doesn't simply come from optimizing today. It comes from creating something new. It's about becoming something fundamentally different. And so what we need to do in this Horizon 2 space to thrive, to enable transformative change, is change the rules by which we allow for something different to emerge. And so I want to give three proposals as to what those potential rules, those conditions, those heuristics may be. And I want to still ground it in the three horizons, just looking at the three horizons through perhaps a different lens, one that we don't just look at three horizons through one of mindful navigation between horizons 1, 3, and 2, but equally so as a leadership practice, such that we're not only applying this framework to the world out there, but actively as a practice that we apply within ourselves in how we drive what we do. And it has to start with our vision. Above all else, what really matters to you? And we call this embodied leadership. And what I mean by that is looking at leadership not just from a place of doing, we need to do something, and that's what it is being a leader, but from a place of being fundamentally. Who do you need to be as an individual to be an effective leader? Right? What are the inner qualities that a leader needs in an uncertain and disruptive world? What would it look like if we were leading from a space of self-determination, right? Not necessarily what looks good on a CV, but what fuels you, what helps you get out of bed in the morning. What do you love over all else? And we do this because, above all else, your purpose is your regenerative fuel source, right? Because that personal vocation remains amongst the highest single leverage point that you have to thrive in today's continually changing world. And then coming back to the present, what do we need to do in the present? And the answer for me here is presence. It's very much a purposeful reflection about the space that we work in. And this comes from the recognition that the challenge we often face in leadership is that we treat change as this technical problem with a known solution, right? This idea that, we just need the right expertise. If we have the right people, the right expertise, things will happen. But in reality, we work on adaptive challenges. We work on challenges that oftentimes require people to change. So there are two elements to this idea of presence that I want to bring across around authentic and presence. First is this idea of suspending judgment for those that we don't agree with. And this comes from this idea of theory U. How, for example, do we enter difficult conversations with those who resist change, right? Can we replace closing ourselves through oftentimes what we all do, through judgment, through cynicism, through fear, with openness, with curiosity, with compassion, with courage? What would it look like if we entered the world with an open mind and an open heart with the people that we engage with, even those that we disagree with? And second is, what would it look like if we entered the world with authenticity? And when I talk about authenticity, I don't necessarily mean it in the way I think we typically or usually hear it, in that, we're acting consistently with past beliefs, with our cultural identity, with our previous track record, but more of a dynamic authenticity, um, rather than consistency aligning with the future that you want. An authenticity where you are anchored in a process of open discovery and open growth. You are open to tension and uncertainty as spaces for transformation. And then finally, how do we sustain this work of transition? And the first thing to acknowledge here is that we're dealing with paradox. We're dealing with two fundamentally opposing but equally valid truths, right? Growth and stability, urgency and patience. And people hold these opposing values as fundamental truths that they ground themselves in. And so the role of a leader isn't necessarily to resolve this paradox, but it's to hold that creative tension and allow for that creative tension to emerge into transformation. And again, there are two ways of thinking about this. And the first is through this lens of force field analysis. This idea that any change that you're trying to make, there are driving forces pushing you forward, and there are going to be restraining forces that are holding you back. And oftentimes, the most effective move isn't necessarily just to push harder towards change, but to understand and reduce the restraints that we face along the way. What is creating this friction? What needs to feel safe before people can experiment? And that word safety matters enormously in this conversation. Psychological safety as this condition under where people can take risks, proposing something untested, admitting that they were wrong, challenging an established norm, asking for help. Without that safety, people default to what they know, regardless of what they believe. So when I talk about resilient practice, I mean building the conditions to allow for us to hold the tension between the forces that are pushing us forward and pulling us back, creating the space for risk taking through safety, and balancing what is authentic to you with an openness to change. All of this to let you stay in a space of transition and transformation without burning out. So that's the way I sort of look at transformation. Three horizons, three capabilities. What matters to you beyond what the system rewards? That's how you sustain yourself. How do you show up in spaces of tension and disagreement? And what would it look like to approach challenges from a place of curiosity, of compassion, of courage? And then how do we navigate resistance? Are we creating the right conditions in that space for experimentation through psychological safety? And to sort of just close everything off, I'd imagine that everyone this call here is working and living across multiple horizons, navigating the constraints of the current system while envisioning and imagining something better, and every day trying to bridge the two spaces. So the invitation for this discussion here isn't necessarily to become someone different. It's to recognize the capacity that you're already building and move from describing what's happening and what we need as thought leaders to drive what's happening next. Not alone, not all at once, but with the clarity about what matters, honesty about where you are in Horizon 1, and the resilience necessary to stay in the transition. Thanks so much for for your time and looking forward to our discussion.
Thanks so much, Truzaar. This is the second time that I've heard you speak about the Three Horizons, and I found it as fascinating this time as I did the first time round. So thank you very much. We'll invite the audience to put questions in the chat or to raise a virtual hand. I'll give them a moment to do that, but I did have a question, Truzaar, just thinking about the rules and conditions that you were speaking about. It speaks very much to the experience of being an interdisciplinary researcher or someone who's leading an interdisciplinary project. And I think I'm right in saying that you are working on an interdisciplinary pilot project, which is using the Three Horizons framework. So I'm interested to know how you've applied this framework to that collaboration that you're involved in.
Yeah, massively so, right? It's more often than not the conversations that we're having now are what could potential futures look like? And so in the context of this collaboration that Lauren you're mentioning that's funded as a seed project by the White Rose, we're trying to understand how do individuals who work in the food system, specifically individuals who are farmers selling their goods at local farmers markets and so on, how do they understand what their future could look like, right? What is that future vision for them? What is important to them as individuals working in this space? What are the challenges that they currently face? Because those are real, those are tangible. And then what opportunities do they see coming across the next few years that would help them address those challenges and work towards their future vision? The challenge with the way we sort of approach the Three Horizons today is that it's very much a cerebral exercise, right? It's strategic. It's thinking, okay, well, this is what an ideal future would look like based on, what we'd like to see and based on the constraints that we currently face working in a capitalist structure and so on and so forth. Similarly, these are the challenges that we face. We don't have enough money, so on and so forth. What we're curious to see is if we can switch that conversation, moving people from their head down to their heart. How do we pull out the emotional resonance in those conversations? How do we get people to really talk about how they feel about the future? Not necessarily that, we're looking for financial stability in the future, but we're looking for a space that makes us happy, makes us feel fulfilled, makes us feel loved, makes us feel whatever else, right? And it's those makes us feel that we're trying to tease out. So we're in active conversation right now to see if we can have better questions. So we're working with a colleague of Leeds who does this type of work exactly, arts-based narrative discourse, to understand what types of questions can we ask to tease out those feelings, those emotions. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Truzaar.